Joining me now is National Security Adviser Mike Waltz. Colonel Waltz, welcome to Meet the Press.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be with you.
It's great to have you. Let's start with President Trump's attempts to scale back USAID, essentially stepping back from countries that have long relied on American support. The former administrator of USAID under George W. Bush called it a huge mistake, adding, quote, "This assistance is one of the most powerful tools Washington has to push back against Chinese and Russian influence and to prevent transnational threats such as disease and terrorism from reaching U.S. soil." Is America basically handing China and Russia an opportunity to expand their influence on the world stage?
No, absolutely not. And in fact, Kristen, this is exactly what President Trump, Secretary of State Rubio, Elon Musk, myself, and many others who have worked with USAID are talking about. All too often, these missions and these programs, number one, are not in line with strategic U.S. interests, like pushing back on China. They're doing all kinds of other things that, frankly, aren't in line with strategic interests or the president's vision, number one. Number two, often, all too often, only cents on the dollar actually makes it to people in need between the big contractors, the subcontractors, the local contractors. The dollars aren't being used wisely. We need to take a hard look at it. We need to move quickly. And that's exactly what's being done. And personally, I could tell you, I've worked out in the Middle East. We saw a radio station with a big Built by America USAID. We go inside, and there is literally a black turbaned mullah backed by Iran preaching anti-American hate. And yet the USAID officer in charge told me as a Green Beret, well, we're just building radio stations. We're just handing out food. That's our job, to just be humanitarian. No. We need to realign their mission and line it up with the president's foreign policy vision.
Well, let me ask it this way. I mean, the Trump administration effectively is trying to gut the entire agency. USAID has fought AIDS globally, worked to eradicate polio, served as the world's largest provider of famine relief. Why didn't the administration look at individual programs and take the time to figure out what your priorities are, what could be saved?
Well, it's perfectly reasonable to say, let's pause, and then let's let those key programs bubble up and come through. And that's exactly what we're doing through a waiver process. We have issued dozens and dozens of those waivers to let, for example, things like Ebola screeners and other programs get through. So Secretary Rubio, as the acting administrator, and I think that is perfectly appropriate for USAID to be kind of tucked into the State Department and better align with their mission, rather than just spreading money around, kind of peanut butter spreading all around the world. Let's line it with key objectives, key goals, and as those waivers go through, those payments are going through. So this is a pause, but I've got to tell you, the president is ready to move quickly. He's ready to move boldly, and that's what his team is doing.
But, I mean, Colonel, it's a pause because the court stopped it. The administration had slashed a staff of more than 10,000 down to about 600 people. How many people are currently working for USAID?
Look, the USAID, and you have seen hearing after hearing after hearing on this, and the current chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee and the past in the House completely support an overhaul of USAID. It has become incredibly bloated. It's become incredibly top-heavy, and it's essentially a series of contracts. If you think the big defense contractors have too much power and too much influence, wait until you dig into the USAID contractors and the subcontractors and the subcontractors and the local contractors. Case in point, I don't think the American people support $3 billion plus going over to the Taliban through a series of UN contractors that only allow the Taliban to then play winners and losers with who supports them and who gets punished with them on the ground. And we have documented evidence after documented evidence that that's the case. And yet we want we don't want studies and commissions. The president wants action, and that's what he's getting.
You know, Colonel, you used to support parts of USAID's mission. As a member of Congress, you sponsored legislation for USAID to expand girls' access to education worldwide, which you said was, quote, essential to our national security. Is foreign aid vital to the nation's national security?
When foreign aid is aligned with U.S. objectives and U.S. objectives meet the president's objectives as commander-in-chief, then it is. But that is not the case. Many of these senior aid officials have their own agenda, have gone in their own direction. And these programs, many of which are no longer authorized by Congress, just seem to continue in perpetuity. So we could talk the entire time about USAID. I have a lot of experience about it on the ground. But in these first 2 weeks, we've had major foreign leaders. We have the Mexicans putting thousands of their troops on the border, the Canadians putting their assets on the border, Panama moving away from Belt and Road, Colombia first refusing to take deportation, and then now taking it. And we can go on and on with the successes of the hostages that the previous administration couldn't get out. President Trump says there's all hell to pay. And now we have not only hostages from Hamas reuniting from their family, from Venezuela and from the Taliban, too. So we've had an amazing 2 weeks. We could get into the details of foreign assistance, but it badly needs reform.
All right, let's move on to Elon Musk. President Trump says he's directing him to now find cuts in the Pentagon. It's worth noting the Defense Department has billions of dollars with contracts with Elon Musk's companies. Do you believe that is a conflict of interest for Elon Musk to be finding cuts at the Pentagon?
Elon is the head of the Department of Government Efficiency, and if there is any agency what I have a ton of experience with in the Department of Defense with an $800 billion plus budget, it's DOD. Everything there seems to cost too much, take too long, and deliver too little to the soldiers. I, as a member of the House Armed Services Committee, held up a bag of bolts that would cost $100 in a hardware store that cost $90,000 to the United States Air Force. And the American people have said enough. Enough with the bloat and the waste and the debt. And when we have $1 trillion of interest in our debt that's exceeded our entire defense budget, we do need great minds and we do need business leaders to go in there and absolutely reform the Pentagon's acquisition process.
But, Colonel, my question is Elon Musk the right person for that job, given his billions of dollars in contracts with the Defense Department? How can he cut an agency where he has billions of dollars at stake?
Well, look, with all of the appropriate firewalls will be in place. But I'll tell you, as someone who used to have Cape Canaveral in my district, the president created the Space Force. And in 2018, the Chinese launched more than us and the rest of the world combined. Now, in just this last year, SpaceX has launched more than the rest of the world combined, has transformed, along with the president's directive to transform space. But if you want to sit that aside, that's fine, because there is plenty to look into in shipbuilding, which is an absolute mess, to look into contracting, into procurement, and in many of these cases where you pay people right up front, and then they don't deliver for years and years and years, where maintenance and costs overrun, where facilities have literally feces and mold and cockroaches in them for our barracks and our soldiers. We need all the efficiency we can get in the Pentagon, and I think the American people and the soldiers will welcome it.
We have a fair amount more to get to. Let's go to Gaza now. President Trump suggesting the U.S. would take over Gaza. And then he walked back saying U.S. troops are not going to be on the ground. Let me ask you, Colonel, what is the White House's plan for who will control Gaza once the war is over?
Well, right now, the IDF is the Israeli Defense Forces have had to go in and will continue to destroy Hamas if they do not honor the terms of this ceasefire. So that's point one. Point two, President Trump looks at this in very practical terms, in the sense of, Are we going to repeat the definition of insanity here and pour billions in, rebuild, and just have another October 7th again and another war years from now? Let's look at the reality of having 1.8 million people sitting in piles of rubble with no sewage, with unexploded ordnance. And he's asking in a humane way, what is going to happen to these people? And everyone around the region says their heart breaks for the Palestinians, rightly so. But then come to the table with your plan if you don't like his plan. And interestingly, we are seeing all kinds of outreach since the president made that statement of saying, let's help you take this on. And so those conversations are ongoing right now.
Okay, so having conversations with other world leaders about potentially being a part of that post-construction effort once the world war is over. Let me ask you this: does the U.S.
But the key piece is you can't get to post-construction. You can't make this the Paris of the Mediterranean like Beirut was back in the 70s and give these people a better life if you've got 1.8 million people living in absolute squalor in mountains and mountains and mountains of debris. It's just President Trump is a builder. He's a deal maker in chief, and he understands that this is it just doesn't make sense. So for anyone, the media included, that doesn't like what he is proposing, come to us with a better plan.
Rapid fire final round, if I could. Let's talk about Canada. In a closed-door meeting with business leaders, outgoing Prime Minister Justin Trudeau warned that President Trump is serious about annexing Canada to make it the 51st state. Is he right? Is President Trump serious about planning to annex Canada?
Look, I think the Canadian people many of them would love to join the United States with no tariffs, with lower taxes. And I have all kinds of neighbors down in Florida that are Canadians that are escaping many of the liberal policies and have moved in. But look, what we're talking about
yes
here
or
is
no? First of all, I think some
American
Canadians would disagree with you.
in the Western Hemisphere.
I think some Canadians would disagree with you, but just yes or no, is he planning to annex
part
Canada?
Of his policy. Well, I don't think there's any plans to invade Canada, if that's what you're talking about. But there is a lot of people that like what we have in the United States and do not like the last 10 years of liberal progressive governance in Trudeau. But really what you're seeing is a reassertion of American leadership in the Western Hemisphere from the Arctic all the way down to the Panama Canal. And that's what we're talking about, from Greenland to Arctic security, to the Panama Canal coming back under the United States. America has avoided our own hemisphere where we have the energy, the food, and the critical minerals for way too long. And you're seeing a reassertion of President Trump's leadership.
The New York Post is reporting that President Trump says that he spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Colonel, when did that phone call take place? Was it after the president was elected? And what was his message to Putin?
Well, I'm not going to get ahead of the president, and there are certainly a lot of sensitive conversations going on. We will have our Secretary of State, our Secretary of Defense, our Vice President, our Special Envoy in Europe this week, talking through the details of how to end this war. And that means getting both sides of the table. What he has said is Russia's economy is not doing well. He is prepared to tax, to tariff, to sanction. We need to get all sides of the table and end this war. And it has come up in conversations with President Xi, with Prime Minister Modi, with leaders across the Middle East. Everybody is ready to help President Trump end this war. Let's get all sides of the table and negotiate.
Colonel, you've talked about every other world leader the White House has. Can you just say yes or no? Has he spoken to Putin, and are those sanctions coming potentially this week?
I'm not going to get into details, but the president's prepared to put all of those issues on the table this week, including the future of USAID to Ukraine. We need to recoup those costs, and that is going to be a partnership with the Ukrainians in terms of their rare earths, their natural resources, and their oil and gas, and also buying ours. Those conversations are going to happen this week. And I think an underlying principle here is that the Europeans have to own this conflict going forward. President Trump is going to end it. And then in terms of security guarantees, that is squarely going to be with the Europeans.
We're way out of time, but who do you like for the Super Bowl tonight, Colonel?
The Jacksonville Jaguars, but we had a really tough year.
All right, well, maybe next year. National Security Advisor Mike Waltz, thank you so much for joining us. We covered a lot of ground, really appreciate it. And when we come back, Democratic Senator Andy Kim of New Jersey joins me next.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.